Okay, question from James Oakley.
Thank you. I hear a lot of compelling arguments about how we'll be a socially democratic society if we vote yes, but I don't hear how we'll achieve this. I don't remember any promises about rises in the minimum wage or tax regime changes. How can I vote for something with so little detail?
So, does any panel member particularly fancy taking this one? Kieran?
Okay. Yeah, I would say that this referendum is not really about a particular mandate. It's about the chance that there's going to be more powers in the future. It will not be till 2016 where political parties will be laying out their manifestos about what they want to see in an independent Scotland, because it's not going to be an independent Scotland until 2016. Personally, as a Green Party, we have a whole raft of policies. We recently produced a paper on something called the citizen's income, which means basically that everybody gets £100 a week just as a kind of basic living, and that just goes to everybody. We need to raise taxes to implement that, but it just means that we don't persecute people on unemployment benefit or sickness benefit. We just have a completely universal citizens' income that would help lift the poorest out of abject poverty. So there are lots of different radical ideas about what you could do to have a more progressive culture in an independent Scotland, but I would say that the referendum isn't really about a particular set of policies or ideas. It's about the possibility that different political parties will put forward ideas in 2016, and it'll be up to people to vote for who they think has the best ideas.
Thank you. It might be nice to hear from the SNP on this issue if you wouldn't mind responding.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah. I mean, the answer you've just heard really is the crux of the matter. If you want something after independence, you'll be able to vote for it, and if everybody else in Scotland agrees with you, you'll get it. It's that simple issue. On the minimum wage, I mean, you'll often hear Labour politicians pointing to the minimum wage as one of the great things that was achieved by the Blair government, and great in principle, but if you don't connect it up in such a way that it actually increases with inflation and the cost of living, then it just becomes a mechanism to put more and more working people into poverty. And that's what's happened over the years. So what we really need is a minimum wage that's up closer and progressing towards that living wage. And then we can actually see people getting the rewards for work that they deserve. And I think that's something that most folk would agree with. And I'm sure it's something that will be in a lot of the manifestos for the first independent elections to the first independent government in Scotland. So, you know, it'll be there. You'll be able to vote for it. And hopefully that's what you'll get if we can convince all of our fellow citizens in Scotland that that's the way to go. There'll no doubt still be a Tory party in Scotland arguing a contrary case, but we'll have the chance to make sure that they're kept where they should be and having a proportional representation based on the votes that they get rather than a disproportionate over-representation that they have on us now.
Thank you. I don't think with every question we need all panel members answering, but if you've got anything else to add, then feel free. Okay, let's go to the second question then. Who's that from?
Kathy Molly.
Hi, I work for a charitable organisation. It's a small organisation, and we've already had cutbacks in our funding of 15%. What I want to know is, will there still be funding for small charities, or are we going to go under?
What organisation do you work for?
The Miscarriage of Justice organisation.
Miscarriage of Justice organisation.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone want to take that question? Yeah?
I think there's two sides to this. One is what's going to happen if we stay, if it's a no vote. And I think it's definitely going to mean cuts. There's no question about it, because the big problem is that we get 30 billion and that's all we get, and it's going to get cut again. So it's going to go 24, 25, 25 go down the way, 25, 24. But you know what I mean. And that's it. The Scottish Government can't get any more money than that. There's new tax powers coming in, but they're not in yet. So it's going to mean cuts. Where they decide to make the cuts, I don't know. And I don't know if it will be your organisation, Community Scotland, but They may just cut a wee bit across the board. So cuts are coming, and it's 1.4 trillion that the British government owes. And it really is that simple. I mean, I've lost about £300 tax credits and child tax credit. And it really is, they've taken it out of my pocket and they've just put it in the Treasury, and then they've given it to the international markets that they borrowed the money off to give to the banks. It's a straightforward sum. You don't need to do calculus. And that's the direction. In a Scottish part, if we had independence, well, we're going to have the wealth, and I'm not going to pretend that we'll have the wealth to provide for decent public services, to redistribute. I'm in favour of redistributing that. I think the idea that the people in the country don't really own or have access to the wealth of their country, and it gets exported overseas to the Cayman Islands and tax havens and shareholders in Dubai, you can change the law and you can bring it back. So that's a debate. But we would have the wealth to do it. The big issue is, what do we do with it? And so far, the SNP government seem to say they want more progressive social policies. If Labour get elected, I don't know what they'll do, but they may make it more progressive. But all I would say is that the mood at the moment is to be more progressive, and you've got much, much more power to change it, to influence it. The voluntary sector in Scotland have got huge power to shape civic society, as it's called. Yeah. And I think that's a game changer. You don't have that power with Westminster, and for me, that's why. The job's not over if we get independence in the next, oh God, the idea, 19th of September. The job starts then to begin to shape the society that we want, and we can't just leave it to a few. We've had this huge movement and people debating. We need to keep doing it. So I know that's not an answer, but I would be lying if I could guarantee it, because we can't.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'll just say something quickly.
Yeah, on you go.
I'll just say something quickly. It's a small charity, yeah? Small. Yeah. You've had a big effect. I've heard these. So, you operating in that kind of sector, I'm sure you'll have gripes with some of the bigger organisations that not only hoover up a lot of the public money, but they have people employed to just deal with hoovering up that money. And so the reason that happens is, if you look closely at the third sector in Scotland, what you see is a growing poverty industry. And so the reason that that's happened, in my opinion, is because even though we've created a parliament, because we all grew up in this imperial soup and this culture, then some of the organisations that we've created have picked up those same habits. And so my experience of dealing with the third sector has very much been wheeled out as a testifier of my experience of poverty. So these organisations talk in a language of empowerment, they talk in a language of democracy, but they're unconscious of their own privilege. They don't realise that when I'm dealing with them, I can only empower myself so much, and then someone wants to try and tell me how to talk and what I should say. So I think, and if we make a yes vote, we can start tackling that culture, because what is at the root of that is privilege, and that's what Francis is talking about, privilege that affects women, affects poor people, ethnic minorities, gay people, whatever. And I know that that's, maybe other people might say, oh, that's got no detail, that answer. But the people who keep asking for detail, they probably don't know the detail of the status quo. So they're holding the yes vote up to more scrutiny than what they're holding the reality that they already live in. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks very much for that question. Third question. What's your name, sir?
Right. It's Arthur.
Arthur, ask your question, please, sir.
Okay, as an active member of CND, I'm very pleased that a number of the panel have mentioned the issue of nuclear weapons. And it would be my understanding that if there is a no vote, then we'll be in a position where there would be a vote at Westminster in 2016 to decide whether we were going to continue with Trident replacement at a cost of £100 billion. Now, if that vote's taken at Westminster in the event of a no vote, I'd be quite interested in the opinion of the panel of how they think that vote will go.
Thank you very much. So that's about the 2016 vote. Yes, Kieran?
Yeah, So nuclear weapons policy that is close to my heart. It just seems unbelievable that we have these weapons of mass destruction, that a single weapon could kill hundreds of thousands of people. It doesn't seem ever conceivable that there could be a moral justification for the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. So just their existence to me seems abhorrent. And the current status of the Labour Party policy seems to be pro-renewing Trident, as is that of the Conservatives. The question would be, who's holding the balance of power? Do the Lib Dems, would they have enough sway? It seems unlikely. So it's pretty hard to predict exactly what's going to happen in 2015 elections. But my understanding of it would be that we would get a renewal of Trident if there's a no vote. So I think that should be a strong incentive for everyone to do everything they can to make sure there's a yes vote.
Thank you. Francis, I see you've scribbled some notes. Would you like to jump in on that one?
Who can say? I've got a lot of the numbers as well. The problem is, and I mean, I've protested at South Faslane as well, but it depends who wins the 2015 general election. If the Tories and UKIP win the 2015 general election, I think nuclear submarines in the Clyde is only one of many issues that we're going to be very, very worried about. And even if in 2016 Labour win it, well, they're still committed to keeping Trident. So, oh, this sounds pessimistic, but unless we have a massive campaign of civil disobedience or something like that, then I can't see how nuclear weapons are going to be removed for the Clyde in that period of time. There is a chance with independence, but we need to see. And I'm a supporter of CND, but it is about that power. So maybe we'll have to see. We need a mass movement if we don't win it.
And Brian, it's categoric, isn't it, that if it is a yes vote, then they will go?
Absolutely, and I think there's an awful lot of us will die in a ditch rather than see that policy ever change, certainly within the SNP, and I know within these other parties that have spoken today. I'm a former chair for UK and Ireland of the Nuclear 3 local authorities, so the whole nuclear issue is something that I take very, very seriously. The weapons is what brought me into politics, but the other nuclear issues around power and waste are very close to my heart as well too. Some in the no camp have suggested that the idea of us foisting Trident down the south, onto the folk in England is in some way going to be a negative thing. But CND's own work has demonstrated that there are very few places where it could feasibly go down south. And I suppose you could argue that if they throw enough money at it, you can achieve anything. But that's not what the issue will be. The issue will be the folk in the south of England want the nuclear weapons there in the same way that we don't want them up here. And I think the power of public opinion, when they do come to look for another site for a renewed Trident in England, will be very similar down there when the prospect is upon them as it is up here. So I think for me, if we get rid of nuclear weapons from Scotland, we'll see nuclear weapons go from the UK. That'll be people power in action.
Can we just get the microphone back to Arthur and just ask him if what his feelings on this subject are?
Well, I mean, I think my view would be that it looks likely that if we are left to if we have a no vote and we're left with Westminster politicians making that decision in 2016, it's unlikely, whatever the government is at that time at Westminster, it's very unlikely that there won't be a vote to replace Trident, and that will be £100 billion that could be spent in decent things like health, education, community care and jobs. So that's really why that's such an important issue.
Thanks very much, Arthur. Do we have a fourth prepared question? Yep.
Hi, I'm Craig.
Hi, Craig.
I'm voting yes anyway. I think really it's up to the people of Scotland to make decisions for themselves, but my question is regarding the Constitution. I'd like to know who's going to write the Constitution, when the Constitution is going to be written, and how it's going to be written, who's going to take part in the writing of it.
Okay, so who writes it, when, and how? Will we start with the SNP on this one?
I love all these assumptions that it's going to be an SNP government dealing with these things, but that'll be up to you. And so will the written Constitution. I think the commitment is that we do something similar to what's been done in other places like Iceland, where the people are empowered to write the Constitution. It's not something for politicians. Constitution of a country is a politician's rule book, or it should be, which is probably why Westminster doesn't like to have one. It's really up to the people. There's lots of mechanisms we can do to do that. You know, we can have local gatherings, local appointed representatives. You can do it by random lottery, a bit like getting called up for your national service, or rather your jury duty. You know, you could be called up to be a consultee in the referendum. But the widest possible consultation we can have, the better. I'm very much in favour of doing innovative and different things to have your consultations. It's not just about putting a few questions on a website and expecting people to find their way there and fill it out. You know, I think we need to have a massive national conversation. We're getting quite good at that in Scotland. We'll have a massive national conversation. The people will write the Constitution, and the politicians, and maybe even me, if I'm still one by then, will have to be bound by that, and that's, I think, the way it should be.
Yeah, jump in there.
If you come along to the CCA on Thursday night, you could speak to Elliot Bilmer about that. He's actually currently working on the Constitution for Scotland, a model Constitution for Scotland, or even better, if you got the book, a model Constitution for Independent Scotland. It makes fascinating reading.
Thank you. Jamie?
We'll move on to Craig.
Hi. Does the panel think that Scotland should be actively encouraging immigration into Scotland? And given that Westminster is discouraging this, if Scotland votes no, how would it then go about doing so?
Thank you. Yeah, on you go.
I'll just say something quickly about that. I think yes, we should be encouraging immigration, but similarly, we should be mindful of the communities where immigrants may go to work and live. Because what we have now is this anti-immigration narrative resurfacing. And the reason for it is, I mean, whether the Liberal class want to chastise people in Govan Hill for being raging about the fact that their scheme is overrun with different types of cultures and people, then fair enough. But those people don't live in those communities. So my feeling is that it would need to be really relook at how people are distributed when they do come to the country, because historically it's the same areas in places like Glasgow anyway, it's the same areas where people come, and not just people that are coming here maybe to work or for opportunity, but also people who are here seeking asylum from unspeakable horrors that they're coming from. Unspeakable horrors, might add, that often occur as a blowback from our foreign adventures. So I think the public need to understand why there is immigration, why there's a demand to come to this country. It's not just because people love freedom and everybody wants to come here because it's a land of opportunity. It's because we do a lot of meddling abroad as well. It's not a subject I'm an expert on, but that's just my observation as somebody who lives in Glasgow.
Kieran, on you go.
Yeah, I think it's a really complicated issue. Obviously, you couldn't really have a completely open doors policy and allow everybody in the whole world to come to Scotland, but you do want to have a more humane policy. That what we have at the moment, asylum seekers live on absolute pittance. They don't get money, they get food vouchers, or like vouchers that you can spend in supermarkets, and they're not allowed to work, and life is really, really tough for a lot of asylum seekers. There's completely destitute asylum seekers who aren't allowed to work and don't get any money at all. So I think it's fundamentally quite inhumane the way we treat asylum seekers, and we need to look at the whole thing from scratch. But I think we do. Demographically, it's we live in a kind of aging society. Fewer people are having children, so it's actually probably a good thing to have a certain amount of immigration just to keep the kind of demographics healthy for the country.
Do you feel satisfied by those answers? Go back to you if you want.
Just to let you know, as we were talking about immigration the other night, I don't know if maybe this kind of a subject was brought up, but I was outside celebrating, having a cigarette with Donegal going to the All-Ireland final there. So my family are all immigrants as well, so it's just how long roughly will we see the eradication of food banks in Scotland and have a proper social system for the poorer citizens and the qualified people who, through no fault of their own, that are unemployed, like my brother now and again he's worked since he was 15, you know what I mean, pipe fitter. He's around the world, the whole lot, but he'll come back and there'll be no work. And seemingly the work all comes out at the same time. So he's sit for periods of time and there's nothing for him. And he has to go up and embarrass himself, going through all these forms and everything else, and they've already got all your details. So I'd like to see a change in the system for that. And also, just maybe, I'd ask anybody to answer, but your man's in the government just now, in the power, the SNP guy, the eradication of food banks and putting social systems back to the way they should be, you know what I mean, instead of making people feel as if they're a piece of dirt, you know.
What's your name, sir?
Big Shetland Pony.
Big Shetland Pony. Brian, would you like to answer Shetland's question?
Absolutely, and Donegal's a lovely place. One of the best holidays I ever had was in Donegal, fantastic. And I'm sure I've probably got relatives who are there too if I look back far enough, and I think most of us have in Scotland. Obviously, the big impacts that we're seeing now, there's always been poverty issues in Scotland, but some of the worst impacts we're seeing now are all coming from Westminster policies. And of course, the best thing we can do about that is to repatriate those policies to the Scottish Parliament, which I don't think any party in government in the Scottish Parliament, with the possible exception of the Tories, would have implemented some of the appalling things we've seen done over the last few years. Whether that was Labour in Westminster introducing the bedroom tax for private tenants first, by bringing in a limit on the amount of housing benefit they could receive. And then, of course, that being followed up with the Tory government bringing in the bedroom tax for ordinary social housing tenants. Absolutely appalling, impacting worst on the people who could least afford it. You know, something like 80% of those affected by the bedroom tax have a disability or someone in the household. And, you know, it's just the kind of thing that I don't think any government in the Scottish Parliament would do if the Scottish Parliament had the power to implement those social policies. So independence is the answer for so many of these things. But you've also got to make sure that we're implementing the right kind of policies. If you have a democracy, you can bring in the policies that we want to see. All right, go on, you go.
Basically, I was asking anybody to answer, right, but yourself being in power kind of a thing, I was asking what you're going to do. We already know what they've already done. I'm asking what you're going to do. Instead of going round about it, that's what I'm asking.
Right. No worries. Obviously, if it's an SNP government in the first independent parliament, the commitment's there not to go forward with any of the further reforms that have been proposed by Westminster. We're going to reverse the bedroom tax fully as opposed to just mitigating it, which means we're paying for it from Scottish budgets instead of paying for it from the overall budget. So the commitment is there to reverse what's been done, and I think we need to take that an awful lot further, and we'll have the power to do that after independence.
All right, Shetland? Loki, any plans to stand for Parliament?
What? I'm only 18 months sober, so piss off. And another thing just about the food banks, like, it's getting used as a bit of a political football now, you know, but I think it is a wee bit more nuanced in the sense that what it does show is that communities have got a capacity to organise and deal with the concerns that are facing them. What we want to do is unlock that sort of capacity so that it's no use to address basic fundamental human rights. So imagine the people that are organising tirelessly to make sure that people are fed. Then imagine that they were unleashed on the community to raise the standard of life in other ways and encourage people. And the other thing is, it all comes down to privilege again. I happen to think that people living their way up in the upper echelons of society quite like the idea that most of society will return to this kind of Charles Dickens nightmare, where people have rickets, and you know what I mean? Like, just enough's enough, man. Just get them out, you know, vote yes.
Thank you.